Hello, everybody, and welcome to today's Insider Insights. Before we get started, I'm going to kind of give it a minute as people roll in. As you're rolling in, we thought it would be fun if you could share any kind of fun activity or hobby that you like to do on the weekend or even the weekday. So be sure to share that in the chat. Brooklyn and Tiffany, what about you guys? What do you guys like to do on the weekend?
Mhm. I live in Tulsa, and Tulsa is known for being a very charitably minded community. So there's a high net worth family that started this like $1 million park where families can come and gather and be outside. It's called the Gathering Place, and it's on the river, and it's near the walking trail, and it's just beautiful. So we've been spending a lot of time there.
Oh,
Yeah.
that sounds so fun.
For
Yeah.
me, we're in the very short season of camping season. So I'm in the Oklahoma City area and we have a lot of wonderful state parks around. So my family loves to camp, and yes, we are hardcore and we camp in a tent
In the rain.
in the
Nice.
rain sometimes. So we just
Wow.
went camping this past weekend. We're planning another trip in the coming weeks. So I just think it's fun. And I like laying in the hammock and reading. And we did a really cool hike. It was like along the way we got to see fossils and be near the water. And yeah, it was really fun.
You
That
found a cat and adopted a cat one
We
time.
did. We adopted our cat, Cindy Lou, from a camping trip. So you just never know what you're going to bring home.
Oh my gosh, that sounds so fun. That's kudo points to you because I could not do that hardcore camping. That is not for me.
Me either.
And I'm in Bozeman, so
Yeah. Yeah.
So what do you do in Bozeman, Maddie? I mean, for fun.
oh, for fun. Well, I'm actually originally from Houston. I moved up here 2 years ago, and so I'm kind of still adapting to the mountain lifestyle. But right now, especially when it's nice spring weather here, I like to go kind of hike, like locally, and then on the weekends, like my husband and I will take our dog, our baby, to the park usually because he's our pride and joy right now in our life.
Oh, what kind of dog do you have?
He is a Cavalier King Charles Spaniel, so he is super, super spoiled.
So sweet with the ears, right?
Yes, the
Yeah.
spaniel ears. Yes, he is our baby. So we like to do things on the weekend where we can bring him along with us. So even if it's
Maddie,
driving in the
Sweet.
car.
we got our baby a stroller. He's a 10-pound Yorkie. Yeah.
Oh my gosh, I love Yorkies. Awesome. Okay, well,
Yeah.
I guess we can go ahead and get started. So, again, welcome to today's Insider Insights, succession planning for advisors and how today's firms are thinking about tomorrow. We are excited to welcome XYPN member Brooklyn Brock and Tiffany Lee from Ellevate Advisors. So, in today's session, Brooklyn and Tiffany will cover how to reframe succession planning as a long-term leadership strategy, not just a future exit, and explore how to start preparing now, even if retirement feels far away. We'll also touch on key warning signs, common pitfalls, and the personal dynamics that can impact a successful transition. A few housekeeping items. There is a Q&A at the bottom, so if you have any questions, please drop them in there as they come up, and you can also upvote questions as appropriate. We will be dropping links in the chat, so please be sure to register for any of our upcoming events, and be sure to grab your pass for XYPN Live in San Diego, California this year from September 29th to October 1st. And there is also a handout available for today's presentation that Brooklyn and Tiffany provided us. So we will also be dropping the link for that in the chat as well for you to follow along. We will be sharing links again. All reference resources will be available when we share the recording via email. So keep your eye on your inbox, and that handout will be available as well. So I'm going to pass it on to Brooklyn and Tiffany to get us started.
Thank you, Maddie. It's such an honor to be here. Thank you for having us. And I'm going to get us started with our own housekeeping add-ons. The handout that we made goes along with our talking points. So I'm going to take us through our three learning objectives, and you can use the handout to take notes about next steps and things that you want to do after hearing our presentation today. And Tiffany and I are co-coaches at Ellevate. We have different work backgrounds, but we have the same level of relationships with our clients. And we bring our different perspectives, which makes the work that much more valuable. We're going to do this presentation as a conversation. We're conversational style today, but we are going to have 10 minutes for questions at the end instead of taking questions throughout. So with that, I think we should dive into learning objective number one, and that is, when is it time to really begin succession planning? So this is just at the top of the handout. When is it time to start? Tiffany, do you want to share a client example story?
Yeah. And my automatic answer that I go to with when is it time to start? I'm like, now. It's never too early, but it definitely can be too late. So, with reframing succession planning today, we're going to be challenging some of our mindsets when we think about succession. A lot of times we think about it as an exit or planning to retire, but that's not the only way that you should be thinking about it. So, for example, one of our advisor clients that we work with, let's just call her Carol. She loves what she does. She loves her firm, like 180 households, loves being a financial advisor in her early 50s, not planning on retiring anytime soon. And feels also financially secure to where she's like, I'm not really concerned about, selling my business for super high value. That wasn't like something that she's really thinking about growing her firm. Like she's just
Yeah, she's still in
enjoying.
the scaling phase, I would say, like still
Yeah.
hiring people on the team and that kind of
Yeah,
stuff.
exactly. So it feels early to talk about succession, you know? So what really prompted her to think more seriously about it is two of her advisors in the firm came to her and on during the summer and said, "Hey, like, is there any equity opportunity here? And like, is this something that you're thinking about?" And so that triggered, like, forced her to like, oh man, maybe I should have been thinking about my succession plan. I don't want to say, well, like, I'm not thinking about retirement yet. It's too early. So in that process, she
Well, because she
realized,
didn't want to lose her people. Like these were
yeah,
client-facing advisors, and it would be really difficult to have to replace them. How do you retain people? This is
yes.
part of that.
Part of the conversation,
Yeah.
absolutely. And then looking at the households that they had, she noticed like 85% of those client relationships were really still led by her. And so this really was kind of a wake up call moment of, oh, I'm not really thinking about retirement, but should I be thinking about succession? And that motivated her to start reframing how she's been, thinking about it all along. So that's just one example story of why you might be wanting to reframe how you think about a transition like that. So, and this is,
Well,
yeah, go ahead.
I mean, it could even be like, I'm not thinking about succession. I might start it by thinking about equity compensation. And
Yeah,
that can be how the conversation starts. And I think that's
yes,
much more normal, even when you have your first hire, that can come up from day
absolutely.
one. People are thinking about it, even if they don't ask.
Yes, yeah. And, someone had asked a question of really, where does succession planning fit in with the continuity planning? So usually when we talk about succession, we're talking about a planned, usually over time, transition of client relationships, equity in the firm. With continuity planning, we're talking about the hit by the proverbial bus. What's going
Eaten
to
by an
happen?
alligator.
Eaten by an alligator plan. And they definitely are different, but they can and often coincide. And so for this example of Carol, it also was like an answer for the continuity situation of that these client relationships, even if you get the equity solved for, if her junior advisors were going to purchase the firm, if something happened to her, these client relationships are at risk, that they haven't established that trust. And so I do say, like, you should think about it separately. They don't have to be the same solution, but today we're really focusing on succession, but they very much go in tandem. So would you add anything to that, Brooklyn?
No, I think that's exactly it. We sometimes, as advisors, don't want to think about succession or retirement, partly because it's like it can be a little bit scary, but also because we don't want our clients to ever think that we won't be here for them. It
Yeah.
feels like it's not safe to talk about that. What I hear a lot of advisors saying is that I'm curious about continuity planning as a way to say that I want my firm to continue after me. So they'll sometimes use the word continuity and succession interchangeably. The way that we talk about it at Ellevate is like succession is the intentional long-term planning and development of the leaders who are going to be a part of the equity transition, as well as the ownership and management transition of the business. The continuity planning is like if you don't have all of that time to plan and it's go time and you have to execute a transaction because something has happened. It's like a condensed version of the succession plan. So they are related. Clients will sometimes come to us and say, well, which one should I start with first? And it depends. We have given different answers to different people based on different situations, but sometimes we'll say, uh, let's look at your success criteria and everything that you want to solve for. And like in Carol's example, that was succession was her overarching criteria, and continuity was one piece of her long-term
Yeah.
plan.
Yeah.
So it's not to be ignored, it's to be slotted in at the right time based on how much of a priority it is and a number of other things.
Yeah. So let's talk about succession then, like this planned transition. And let's talk about what are some of the signs. Like we see signs in Carol's story, right? Your people are asking, and then you realize, like, oh, some of these client relationships are really relying on me. But what are some other things to be looking for when that I should start on this? You want to dive into that?
Yeah, I'm thinking of the handout on section 1C, early signals that it's time to plan. And I maybe should have not put early in the title of that section, just signals that it's time to plan. Because if you see some of these, it could potentially be too late. Like the earlier you start succession planning, the more options you have. So let me just go through a list that I have. Being the primary rainmaker and relationship holder like Carol was, that's a big sign. But having key employees who are ambitious, but they don't know what the path is. And this is something that can even come out in an interview. Like I had a call with FPA Next Gen when I was more involved in leading their conversation circle. And someone said, when I came on as a team member, this founder promised me that I would have a piece of equity eventually. And I've been here for 3 years and I've done XYZ and nothing has ever been followed through on. So if it's ever something that is mentioned or talked about, it's definitely something not to avoid, but to come back to and discuss frequently and often, even if it's like with our business goals that we have of growth or getting a continuity plan in place, we're not going to be solving for succession this year, but that is on my priority list, and we need to get XYZ done so that we can then focus on that next. As long as you have a plan and you are open to taking your team members' input about how to work their concerns into the plan and keeping that space open to talk about, you won't lose your people. So that's good to be thinking about that. Um, Starting to think about the profit margins for a firm to be able to have the next generation buy-in. Once you've gotten through like launching and you have your clients and you're into the scaling mode, then you start to worry about the profit margins and hiring people and equity compensation. So profit margins become something that you think about in terms of the total compensation package, getting your firm to be profitable, but then also how everyone on the team is compensated is part of that. That it's not just to pay out the founder and financially reward us for all of the work that we put in, right? We want to make sure that the compensation is fair for everyone involved and motivational to keep staying involved. And then not having a clear continuity plan. Once you get to that scaling stage, that's a sign that, okay, there is some value in the business here, and we need to start coming up with an answer for this.
Yeah, or adjusting the continuity plan that you already have in place. A
Yeah,
lot of times we launch the firm and you have a plan that it works, or if you're a solo and you found another like-minded advisor, but then your firm has grown and that's not feasible anymore, we really do need a better continuity option. And the succession plan could be a part of that, right?
totally.
And I wanted to say too, some signs that it's a great time to find a successor. Like if you're watching this, then it's probably your sign
That's true.
because you're wondering, what am I gonna do, right? But also like speaking to XYPN specifically too, like if you're really passionate about your niche, and you have we think about niching and growing and scaling a firm. It's not as much talked about in succession planning. And if you really want, you're passionate about that, and you want to continue that niching work, or you have a very specific mission or a very specific service offering, usually it's an internal succession plan that you're wanting to build out. And so starting on that early, finding somebody else that you can train in your expertise. It's one for continuity, but also for eventually having some value in your firm and being able to pass that baton to somebody who would not be able to serve your clients to the extent that you do if you were to like go on the open market one day down the road in the future. So that's also something that it's a sign. If your niche is something that is an important success criteria for you, then go ahead and start. And if you want measurable timelines, we like to say it usually takes about 10 years to develop an internal succession plan, develop and execute. We've done it in shorter amounts of time, but you don't always put your eggs in one basket. So it's a lot of being able to grow the firm, develop your people, and the sooner you start, the more options that you're going to have.
Yeah, I think the last thing I'll say before we move on to learning objective two, Tiffany, is the question about, well, why start? We'll flip that question on its head and ask, well, what happens if I wait? What happens if I don't take action? And it's a hard question because succession planning is such a big topic. It's like, well, what do you even start with? But what happens if we don't start and if we wait is that we might not be able to have that niche preserved. We might, like we were just working with a client who had somewhat niched helping government employees and people who retired from government service. And that's not a niche. He chose not to sell to his team members. He chose to sell to an external acquirer, and he had to give up that niche. A lot of our other clients don't want to give up that niche, and that's why they choose to do an internal succession plan. So it really does depend on your success criteria. And if niching is the strong one, then you do need to start earlier on building the internal succession plan. It's not that you can't exit or that you can't sell. It just limits your options, I would
Mm-hmm.
say.
Yeah, absolutely.
So learning objective number two, and this goes into our handout. Is my firm transferable, not just valuable? And those are two very different things. Tiffany, do you want to share a story with us?
Yeah, I do. So, an advisor that we were working with, her name, let's just say Stephanie as a name, is a really great example of this because she has a valuable firm. Again, loves what she does, and really came to us with saying, I know my successor, I have a plan in place. I just need help like executing this and making sure we're on the right path. And with her firm being, of some value, it was something important to start talking about and making sure that there really is like a documented plan in place. But as we started to talk through this and dig into it, the successor was really actually not as interested in firm ownership, even though she's
We'll name her
deeply,
Becky,
yeah, let's say
right?
Becky. Okay.
Like
Yeah.
Becky had been with Stephanie's firm for like 8 years, and the clients
Right.
love her, right? But
Mhm.
she didn't feel confident about firm ownership being the next
Right.
right step for her, which a lot of people do say that, surprisingly. But what did
Yes.
what did Becky say? Tiffany? What do you remember
Yeah,
from
well, I remember like Becky, it was really a cool story because when I think about succession, I think about this as maximizing legacy, right? And really thinking about client relationships. And they had that figured out into an extent of like in a continuity situation, Becky could be able to serve these clients, but as a long-term solution,
for
Becky was not,
succession?
yeah, for succession. Like she really wasn't interested in being an owner of the firm, right? And that really wasn't her dream. She didn't really see herself as an entrepreneur, but she cares about these clients. She would want to stay on at the firm. So then we have this other part of succession that's really about like the equity side of this, and that a firm can be valuable, but is it actually transferable? And like when it comes to the transfer, what are some of the risks that we're looking at? And so there's pieces of the succession plan in place, but there's another side to be solved for, which is like the transferable part of it. So
Yeah. Well, can I jump in and just add
yeah.
something? I'm just thinking that Stephanie had done something really good with Becky, developing her in her advisor skills, but also as a leader in the business. When they came to work with us, they both came on in the conversations, even though Becky wasn't a partner, an equity partner in any way. And because they've been able to work on this together, they're able to talk about, okay, so if Becky's not the solution, they have another person that they're kind of training up who might be the internal succession solution. But they've also talked about finding another firm to partner with where Becky could stay on with the clients and help shift to that new firm if continuity happened or succession when it was go time down the road for a succession plan. Since Becky didn't want to do that, and if this new person they're training doesn't want to do that, then they have backup options, which they feel really good about. And that's been part of their story because they were able to bring her into Becky into the conversation.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. So with thinking about distinguishing between your firm having value and then is that value transferable, there we a lot of times we see those two different pain points of either you don't have the person, to transfer the relationships with, or you have the person, but the equity side of this and the ownership or management side of this needs to be solved for. And those are different things, but there is a way forward. But it's distinguishing what is it that you're actually needing to solve for. So but would you touch on that, Brooklyn? Like, let's talk about having an employee versus like a true successor, signs of that.
Hmm. Yeah. I think as a firm owner myself, my brain goes back to how do I develop a well-rounded successor and help them shift from just loyal employee to successor. That's part of assuming that's also what they want. That's part of um, the expectation that advisors know how to do that. And that's not something they train us for on the CFP, right? So, like, how do we do this? Well, I started by building a partnership criteria checklist of like, well, I want someone to have been with my firm for X number of years. And given our niche being advisors, um, we've kind of learned over time that we need people on our team who have experience, potentially even experience outside of Ellevate before they come to Ellevate, being a career changer, for example, like Tiffany is, that can actually add a lot of value to our conversations. And so we've kind of made this list of educational and experience requirements like the CFP requires, but also a number of other things. So, like identifying our values as a company and making sure that the person who might want to become a partner one day knows what those values are and shares those values with us. So, this kind of partnership criteria checklist thing becomes broader, right? It's not just quantifiable things, it's qualifications as
Yeah, the
well. So,
qualitative side of it,
yes,
right?
thank you. That's the word.
Yeah. And I'm thinking too, like with transferable value, a really great next step that we've seen a lot of advisors take is go ahead and plan an unplugged vacation. and see how much of this value is transferable, and what I mean by that is like if you're wearing all the hats and everything is relying on you, even if you have value in your firm, the chances of that being able to transition in a succession plan are really low. Or it's going to be a pain point and it puts the firm at risk and it puts your successor at risk
But
potentially.
not if you
And
practice,
yes,
right?
practicing is really important. And we've had multiple advisors who have gone on unplugged vacations for the very first time and are shocked at how their team or their continuity partner, even if you're a solo and you set up a continuity plan with somebody who you want to actually use that continuity plan for things like that, going, unplugged in an area that you're not going to be able to check your email,
Or
seeing
it
that
could be like
successfully happen.
parental leave or taking a sabbatical.
Mhm.
Yeah, it could be
Yes.
really anything. But I think even working up to that, like if that feels too
Hmm.
impossible, you can start small, just saying like, I'm going to take a 3-day weekend.
Yeah. And you
Um,
can train your clients. Like
yeah.
you can build this uh because to be honest, it's valuable to clients to not just have one person that they can trust and turn to. Expanding that circle of trust is valuable to them and minimizes their risk when it comes to their service. And so doing that really intentionally and showing, values first, that you're thinking about them in this as well is really important.
I agree.
So what do you think, Brooklyn? Should we move to the next learning objective?
Let's see. I want to cover a few more things under this one.
Okay.
Um,
Let's talk about like I know a lot of advisors are you come to this place where you're like, well, I'm not sure of my options. Should I consider merging with somebody? Should I consider hiring? That might take a lot of like energy. Should I consider, selling externally because that might be, attractive, especially with the valuation and of your firm. So let's talk a little bit more about those options and what might be the considerations of why you might choose a certain path.
mhm. Yeah, I had one client early on come to me and say, I have been a solo, I have one admin person, and I think I want to do an internal succession plan. What I've built is really special, and this is what I want to do. And she laid out the plan for me. And one of the first exercises we do with a client is we do the success criteria workbook. And we went through with her and identified what she wanted and needed this transition to do for her. Because yes, there's the like, I want to get fair market value for my business. I don't need top dollar. So maybe an internal succession plan could be a good fit. But what came to the surface was that she needed to be able to pay this person and pay herself. She wasn't willing to work for free. And as a solo, she hadn't built up her business to be able to pay her and someone else and her assistant for the amount of time that it would take to bring someone in and have them get comfortable working with the clients and then hand over the reins. And so that, coupled with a few other things, really helped her decide, no, I need to look at maybe an external partnership, finding a like-minded firm where we can both achieve our business goals together by merging. So that's what she ended up doing. And she, knowing that, helped her have so much peace about the decision. I think sometimes it feels like there's this sense of like, I should do what's right for my clients. And maybe there's this perception of an internal succession plan being what's best for the clients. But that's not actually true. There are lots of benefits to merging or selling externally. They're just different.
Yeah.
Understanding what you need and what your clients need actually helps you pick the better kind of succession plan and then even have clarity about how it's implemented. Would you add anything to that, Tiffany?
Yeah, no, I love that you talk about the success criteria because I think in the succession planning world, it's really fun to nerd out. Maybe not fun. It could be fun for some, anxiety inducing for others, but to think of all the options. Like it just
Yeah.
feels like there's so many different ways that you could go about it. And then just like, how can I find my perfect person or the perfect firm to merge with, which does not exist. You won't find the perfect anything. Um, it's, but starting with the success criteria, like you said, of like, start with what am I passing the baton, like what is this baton I'm passing? Am I just talking about client relationships? Am I talking about my niche, my service model? Am I talking about a specific mission that's part of my legacy? Like identifying that first can help you clarify which path and your boundaries that you're going to be playing in. Like, what's my sandbox? And I think too, like if you start early, you don't have to pick one path. And
Mhm.
I would caution you to like be open-minded because you can start out really, thinking I want to do an internal succession plan. And maybe for some reason life happens and that person ends up not being your person and they, have to exit the firm or something just happens. And like
Like Becky. She ended
yeah,
up not
like
being the
Becky and
person.
Stephanie, right. But that's not wasted time. I want to challenge that. Like it's not wasted time to put that energy into somebody. It's helping train your clients too to expand their trust. It's getting hats like off of your head. And so you can change and like plan for internal succession plan and be able to pivot if you need to when the time comes. Like
Mhm.
having plan A, B, C and not just locking yourself into one option.
Yeah. I want to share one more thing before we move on to our third learning objective, which is something that I feel like I should have said when we shared this example about Stephanie and Becky is that it can feel like, from the successor's point of view, that I've worked here, I've built these relationships with these clients. Equity is the next step in terms of career progression. That should be what I ask for next, right? Either equity compensation or percentage of ownership, or how do I buy in? It can feel like those are the next right questions. And I I want to challenge that as well, that what Becky ended up doing when she went through her success criteria workbook, because we do that with the founder or the owner, as well as the buyer or the next generation. Each person works on their own success criteria workbook, and it includes professional, career related, business related criteria, like taking care of the clients is often one that comes up. There's also personal criteria on there. And the goal with Stephanie and Becky first, when we started working with them, was to get an answer if Becky wanted to move forward with becoming an owner. And deciding ultimately that that wasn't what she wanted gave a lot of clarity. It wasn't like Stephanie turned around and said, well, then you're out. Like you can't work here anymore. No,
Mm-hmm.
it gave a lot of information about how to then do what is needed for clients. What's the next step? And deciding if you want to buy into your employer's firm or how to do a succession, whether it's internal or external. There's not a right answer. It's more important that you find the answer that resonates with you. And if I'm now in the role of founder and talking to Tiffany about Tiffany coming on as partner one day, I need to make sure that she has done her due diligence, or like in our example, that Becky has done her due diligence just as much as I've done mine for myself with my own success criteria, or Stephanie did for herself in our example. So it's not enough to just do it for yourself, but making sure that that other person feels good about the path forward, and that it meets their needs, both like quantifiable financial needs, but also like that I feel good about this, that like I'm excited about the direction of the firm and making it my own down the road, and that we share that vision. That's really important. Would you add anything that to that, Tiffany? Sorry, I got a little
No,
rambly.
I love it. And I think that's so important that when we think about what does success mean for me as the founder or as the owner, you have to put yourself in the shoes of your
Mhm.
potential successor. Or even if you haven't found that person yet, imagine, what questions they're going to have, what risks that they're mitigating, what life phase they're in, considering all of that is so important, and doing succession the smart way and the right way, and it being able to drive a healthy culture in your firm. So I love that you brought
Mhm.
that perspective.
Okay, so heading into learning objective number three, outlining the first practical steps towards building a succession plan. This is very big. Where do we even start? I'm scrolling down to
Yeah.
the bottom of our handout, section three, first practical steps. Tiffany, let's have our third and final story. I love these stories.
Yeah, I can't promise it's the final. I mean, we might
Oh,
have more
that's true.
stories out there, but yeah. I wanted to spend I wanted us to talk about this like for a little bit, because I do think that people who are here listening in, like, this is most likely what you're wanting. Like, what do I do? Like, give me some practical steps. Where do I start? But it reminds me of some advisors that we worked with, and let's just say Carl and Sarah. So Carl being the founder of the firm and Sarah being a successor. And they had a really healthy firm, pretty much, had scaled it to where they felt good about it at the time. And Carl had hired Sarah. She was on for a few years, right, Brooklyn?
Hmm.
But Carl was like approaching burnout really quickly.
Yeah.
So
He was
them
working like 80
managing,
hours a week. It was crazy.
yeah, and they did really a lot of like heavy, tax prep and planning too. So it was like
Yeah.
those tax seasons, which happy April 15th, everyone. And, and I hope everyone's celebrating tomorrow if you are, um,
Yeah.
being able to still be alive after tax season. But anyway, sorry. Carl and Sarah, long story short, like, Sarah already knew a lot of the clients and they wanted to structure an internal succession plan. Even though Carl was like, I'm not planning on retiring for maybe another 5 years or so, but I've got to slow down. And it's
Mhm.
only fair to talk about like the equity side of this, not just like transferring roles and responsibilities. We want an internal succession plan. So they've gotten it, they had a few things figured out. But between like Carl being really on the verge of burnout, if not
Mhm.
already deep into burnout, and then Sarah feeling like, oh, there's a lot to consider,
She'd
like
never been
in
an
ownership.
owner or started a
Yeah.
company before.
Or
It's a
hadn't
lot.
even really thought about being an owner before. So it's
Yeah.
a lot to
Because these
consider.
weren't her clients. Like she didn't build
Yeah.
these relationships. She can work with the people now. She has great relationships, but she
Mhm.
didn't feel like it was hers. Were these the clients she would have chosen for herself? Maybe not.
Exactly. Yeah. So a lot of the success, which I can say they have successfully executed their succession plan and are doing it in
Well, the
tranches. And
first
so it's
tranche.
the first tranche. So very exciting. But really it was the answer of, what do we do? When do we do it? Because everything feels urgent all at once, especially when you feel like the work or the amount of clients that you're serving, you're so busy doing the good work and running your
Mhm.
firm. So how can you work on a succession planning project at the same time? And so this feeling of like, oh, did we start too late? So the answer was to be able to identify what truly are the most urgent things, and building the confidence, understanding the shared vision, and building out that chronological path like towards decisions.
Yeah.
um
So I think that's what we call the implementation plan, is
right.
the chronological path. And so in Carl and Sarah's implementation plan, if I remember correctly, Tiffany, it was like, okay, so we know that we need to start working on this first tranche of 10% ownership being sold to Sarah, but we also need to solve for a continuity plan because it was with someone else. But
Mm-hmm.
once Sarah became
Yep.
partner, it was like, no, that needs to be between Carl and Sarah. So there were a number of different considerations, another of which was with Carl being burned out, they potentially needed to hire someone else. And so they were
Mm-hmm.
also hiring, and that's a lot of irons in the fire. And so we
Yeah.
just paced it out. and we worked through each one at the right time. And you can have multiple projects going, multiple solutions. It's just you don't work on them all on the same call, right? We end up
Mhm.
having different monthly themes or quarterly themes. We're like, we're going to focus on continuity planning this quarter, and then we'll focus on hiring someone. And eventually the plan all starts to come together, and you look back and it's like, how did we get all that done in 12 months?
Yeah, I would say like what should you do? Like what should you start with? Like if you're listening to this, put on your calendar and block time at a regular interval that says succession plan. And
Mhm.
if it's an hour a month and that's what you can do it. Like if you don't block the time to actually dedicate like whatever is going to go in that spot, even if it's, I'm just going to sit here and think about what I want, like if you don't preserve the time, it's not just going to magically get done. And we all know how time works. Like it just keeps
Mhm.
going. And so that was one of their action items actually was
Yeah.
they blocked time every other week. The two of them met, just succession plan and whatever it is that we need to talk about. What's the next step? What's one way that we can get further into this? If you don't have a successor yet, maybe that time is thinking about, okay, do I have somebody on my team yet? Do I need to hire somebody, or
Partner
do a,
criteria,
yeah,
firm values.
yes. Even if this is like further into the future, you also don't know what life brings. And we've had
Yeah.
multiple advisors who have had a health episode or something has happened where they do need like all the hats that they're wearing, they can't wear anymore for whatever reason. So this is also, again, tied into that continuity planning as well. So blocking the time. But you mentioned Brooklyn tranches, and I'm not sure if
Mhm.
everybody knows that
Mm.
concept or like what that is. And we see that a lot for internal succession planning. So can you go into that a little bit more?
Yes, it's actually a French word. Tranche. And it basically means like a slice. If you were to go to Paris and ask for a slice of quiche, you would say a tranche de quiche.
Mhm.
But that is one of the things that we talk about when we start to get into how to value a firm. And that's because that's often suggested as the first thing to do when you start a succession plan is to get a valuation. And Tiffany and I have talked with clients, especially those looking to do an internal succession plan, about how valuations can be valuable as a source of input or like a piece of information. But there are also a number of other things to consider about the formula that you use to value the firm, because you don't need, if you're going with an internal succession plan, it's very normal to discount from fair market or fair what you would get on the open market. And it's still reasonably close to fair market value to use a discounted multiple for a multiple of revenue. So how do you come up with what that multiple of revenue should be? There are different formulas that we walk our clients through. And so we talk about how to value a firm and how that's different in selling on the open market versus an internal succession versus even a continuity plan. Each of those can be different. So reframing how to value the firm and even how to do the internal succession. Sometimes it feels like, okay, we've just got to get it done. And we're just going to do the whole thing in one transaction. The tranches allow you to do it in slices over time. So you can do it as big or as small as you want. We had a client who came to us for financial planning, and she said, I'm an advisor, I work at this firm, and I was offered 5% of ownership, and me and my husband just aren't sure that that's what we should be doing, given that this employer is such a big part of our household revenue. Should it also be a big part of our investments and like our savings for retirement, what eventually will fund retirement to a large extent? When we're advisors, we need to think about these things and make sure that everyone is on the same page, and that means life partners as well. And so we went back to the her employer firm and said, um, I know that you want to bring on other partners in the future too. I'm not going to be the only one. So this is kind of the feedback that I think anyone would have is, can we do it in smaller tranches than 5%? Because given how quickly the firm was growing, that didn't really feel feasible as an investment for her family to make at that time. And so going back and saying, okay, can I do a tranche of 1%? And then how do I get out of it if something happens and I need to move or something? Making sure that it's
Life
a buy,
happens, right?
yeah, making sure it's a buy sell strategy where someone can sell their shares back if and when that's needed, or that the founder can continue to sell their shares like in future tranches down the road. You don't have to have it all mapped out. Like we're going to do 10 tranches of 10% every year and it'll be done in 10 years. You don't have to commit to the whole plan and you don't
No,
have to
you
do it all
don't.
up front, but creating something where you can implement the next step and adjust the plan as you go and be able to answer some of these things will make it a much easier and more attractive
Mhm.
option for people, I think. Does that
Yeah.
answer what you were looking for, Tiffany?
Yeah, it really makes me think about a question that someone had asked about like how do you structure, the equity buy-ins and making sure it's fair and that it's not like you don't want to overburden the next generation. At the same time, you need to think about like fair value of the firm and recognize the founder's contributions and sacrifices or long-standing team members that are part of the succession plan. Like
Mm.
if you've been a part of building the firm and there wasn't an equity transfer, a few years ago, but you're a part of like building what the business is today, those should be in the calculation.
They can be.
They can be.
Should
Should
depends.
is a strong word. They can be. It's an
Yeah.
option, especially like when you're in a really high trust, high like values led scenario where you guys know each other, really well. You have some history and so the tranches perspective, I think, is it's not as scary like to talk
Mhm.
about, let's do a 10% tranche and
Yeah.
start there and then actually spreadsheet it out and see like, okay, what do ownership distributions look like? What might be a down payment that could be required if you're doing seller financing, which means that from those ownership distributions, the successors are paying the note to, who they're buying from the owner instead of having to go out and get an external loan. It's like we're eradicating the bank essentially. There's still an interest rate, but thinking through how does this actually play out? Where does it break even? Just like any other investment that you're making, and understanding there
Mhm.
might be some sacrifices, but what are the sacrifices and when do they pay off? And, a lot of times we see, while you don't have to commit to a whole tranche schedule, we'll see like, okay, I can see now in 2 years, I can buy another tranche because I see
Well,
where it pays off.
and what you're talking about, Tiffany, is what we call the deal terms analysis spreadsheet or the tranche
Yeah.
analysis spreadsheet.
Yep.
It's an
Hmm.
exercise that we built and have tested with a lot of different advisors and how they're building their succession plans over the years. And so
Yeah.
now, when we get to that stage of like, okay, do we structure it as a 5% tranche or a 25% tranche? Well, let's plug in the numbers. And what you're saying, Tiffany, is those are different levers that people can
Yep.
pull. How much goes into the tranche? How much is needed as a down payment or wanted? Even as a down payment from the various parties, the interest rate that's used, the term of the loan in years. And you have all these levers that you can pull to make it more feasible for the next
Yeah.
generation.
And when we talk about fairness, a lot of
Yeah.
times I do want to say, like, we'll have advisors where let's say there's three different successors, there's one owner or founder, and there's three different successors that are going to become partners. Fairness does not mean all the same. And I think
Yeah.
that's something we need to like understand is like, what does fairness actually mean? Is this feasible? Does this meet your success criteria? And one person at a different life phase might need to move faster than another person at a different life phase. And that's
Mhm.
okay. And it's more about open conversation and understanding if we're all committed to this, how do we make it work? What are the different levers that we can pull? Do we do a different down payment? There's going to be some things that are the same, like the valuation formula that we're using, and that can be equitable. But how do we make this feasible for one person versus the other can be a different conversation, and that's okay. I think that understanding of like there's more flexibility that can be built in to make it
Yeah.
not a burden.
And the advisor in me is jumping out like, oh, but then that brings in this um, almost an unfair power dynamic between partners. If someone is like buying in at 3% and the other person is buying in at 10%, how do decisions get made?
Mhm.
And what is the true value of the person who only owns the 3%? Like, how does a firm navigate that? And that's something that is not to be ignored in all of this. We
Mhm.
deal with it in a separate document because the financial spreadsheet matters, right? We got to make sure this flows. But we also need to make sure that everyone has a voice and that there's an established decision-making process for how the management and the leadership of the firm is transitioned. This
Yeah.
isn't just a transaction. Like we're still in
Yeah.
doing all of this, we're training and handing over the reins to people, and that needs to feel good coming out of
Mhm.
this. Like how that side of the transition makes you feel and everyone feel who's involved can make or break the succession plan. How much you enjoy the work, how much you enjoy being in business with these other partners, it matters.
Yeah. And I want to say, like, to your point, before we do the Q&A, which is, I cannot believe we're already like almost out
How
of
did that
time. That
happen?
went really fast. Um, I'm like, everyone repeat after me. Ownership and management are not the same thing. And if you're going to remember something from this, and that's the only takeaway, I'm okay with that. A lot of times for founders, like you have to be the owner and the manager. I mean, you're the one who started this a lot of times from scratch, or even if you've inherited a business and you're the solo, or you're the one that everybody's looking to for leadership or the CEO. But ownership and management are not the same. And what I mean by that is that ownership and management have to be solved for in a succession plan, both, but the answers could be different. So,
Mhm.
ownership and equity transfer, and how do we do that is one side of it. And the types of ownership decisions that are made that come along with that and decision making, like you said, that really the people who have equity in the firm have to make these types of decisions, even if they're consulting a collaborative leadership team. But then there's also the management of the firm, the day-to-day operations, the day-to-day decisions that we're making, the people management. Those can be different things and they can be solved for in different ways. And if you don't like one or the other side, like that should be one of the preliminary questions. And we see a lot of people say, well, I'm not sure if I want to be a successor. Or if you're the founder and you're like, I'm not sure if my person would make a great successor. It's because you're thinking of ownership and management as the same thing, and they don't have to be the same thing. And maybe the person that you're considering really loves the clients, but they're not into business strategy and they need to be mentored in that, or that's just not their like passion. That's okay. There's other ways to solve for that. If they really are interested, in becoming a successor, having some skin in the game, there's different ways to run a firm, as we all know. And so these are open conversations to have and solve for. You don't have to shut the door too early before really exploring that.
Yeah, I think making space to talk about it is the biggest takeaway because just like you were saying, Tiffany, the founder can sit there thinking like, well, I don't know if this person would make a good successor. And you kind of talk yourself into deciding that they don't even want it. And that's what one of our clients did is he had that
Yeah.
conversation in his mind and he like thought he remembered having it in person, but he never actually had it in person. And so he
Yeah.
made the decision for the person without ever talking to them about it.
Or we've had the opposite of an owner being like, this person's my successor. I
Yeah.
envision them as my successor. They're amazing. And they never actually ever said it out loud.
Stephanie and Becky.
Yeah. And like, so that's another practical step is like,
Yeah.
you got to talk about it. And is it too early to talk about? It usually isn't. You don't have to promise anything. It's more about
Yeah.
like, are you interested in this? What are like some of our goals? What are our mutual goals? What are you seeing in life? Mirroring this
Well,
your life phase. Yeah.
because it can feel hard to have the conversation as the founder. It feels like there's pressure that I come with a game plan of like, this is what
Right.
equity entails. This is how we're going to do this. But really, I think those conversations are about listening to what the other person in the deal wants and needs from this to be able to build it together. And so if it's just approached as like an information gathering, like we're in this together, we're curious and open-minded. Um, and like Tiffany said, you're not committing to anything at this stage, you're not presenting the plan, then I think the conversations can be a really healthy next step. So, should we go to Q&As?
Yeah. think that's great.
Okay,
So you want
go
me to
ahead.
read the question?
Sure.
Yeah, so we have a question, and someone asked, how do you see going from a silo firm to a continuity firm as the older advisors age? How do you factor in the silo you have already built in your new compensation and not have to buy it as part of the deal?
Mm,
A great question.
that is a great question. Tiffany, do you want to go back to Carol's story potentially? Or how would you answer that?
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, the first thing I was going to say is kind of what we were touching on of that there's different when you're creating fair deal terms, what's a part of the equation can be everyone's contributions like to the
Mhm.
firm. And so when you're talking about Carol, like as an example story, and I think this is what you're getting at, Brooklyn, is that one of her successors, let's say Brian, you know, really wanted to create a pathway to take on clients that are his
A
ideal
new
client, a
niche,
new
right?
niche.
Yeah.
Yes. So, in considering the succession plan, it didn't make sense for Brian to like buy the clients that I'm taking on. Like I'm doing the prospecting,
He's bringing them on
I'm
himself.
serving them,
Yeah.
and I've been, and so taking that out of
But he's
the,
also spearheading the niche. So like
yes.
he's doing it along with the team, but it is siloed from the rest of the clients and services they usually provide.
Yeah. So we've seen a few, there's not like a one thing, a one option that you can do. There's not a single option, but we've seen a few things. And for them, they created like a revenue sharing model of these clients that he's bringing on. So there's still the firm's clients, but there's a revenue sharing model that they triggered. We've seen another
Well,
advisor.
and they're split out and listed that
Mhm.
like handled differently in the transaction.
Yeah, and I was going to say when you're considering valuation formulas, in an internal succession plan specifically, you can also take out a segment of clients that don't make sense being purchased, like they're not being bought, from so that could be a part of the equation whenever we're calculating the value of the firm for the buy sell. Now, not the firm entirety. That's good to know as well for everybody, but for the actual transaction that we're doing. And we've also seen another advisor do a very similar thing with the revenue share, but it was with a certain amount of time. It was like bringing on the clients in like that first year, they had a revenue share for a X percentage, and then after that, they really folded into the client. So it also depends on where you are in the timeline, and it depends on the type of culture that you want to have. If you're building this over time, some firms really don't want like a siloed approach and really want to shift into more of a firm approach. But as far as making the deal fair, it requires a discussion and like, does it make sense to exclude some clients from the actual buy sell in the equation?
Mhm. And I think on that note, it can feel like talking about that or even bringing it up if there's not a plan established about how your clients will be carved out and separate in the deal structure, it can feel like awkward to bring it up because it feels like you're asking for something that you already should own. And I think that it feels that way because it feels like emotionally high stakes because it can be financially high stakes. And when I think about having these conversations, things that help are keeping a curious, open mindset of like, we're not coming up with a solution during this conversation. We just want to hear all of the different sources of input, how someone thinks about this, how someone reacts or feels about, when it's said this way versus that way. The words that we use to talk about stuff can make a big difference in how we feel
Yeah.
respected and show up. And I think that that also goes for someone who's buying into a family business as the first non-family business member to buy in,
Mhm.
that you're making space where we can have these safe conversations. Would you add anything to that, Tiffany?
Yeah, and I know we don't have time, but I will say for those who are doing like a family succession plan and you have somebody who maybe is non-family a part of the firm or going to be a part of the succession plan, a takeaway here is you have to document and decide on standards as if we're not family members. It's part of the equation, but we have to step outside of those rules for a second and expand the timeline and say, okay, what does this like? What are our standards as partners, and what's our ongoing and initial due diligence if we didn't have this trusting relationship as we do? Because that's also succession. It's taking yourself and expanding the timeline and being like, we're going to build something that lasts. And so it can't just be like tailored just to us. So, all right, Maddie, I think I ended right on time.
Great. No, thank you guys so much for an amazing webinar today. This was really great conversation regarding succession planning, and hearing the client stories, I think were really, really helpful around this topic. So thank you both so much. Again, we will be sending the link to the recording for today's Insider Insights along with the handout Brooklyn and Tiffany provided. There will be a short feedback survey at the end, so please be sure to fill that out. And if you want to book a call with an XYPN success strategist, please be sure to grab a time with the link in the chat for whatever works for you. But thank you both so much, and thank you all for attending today's Insider Insights. And I hope everyone has a great rest of their week.
Thank
Thanks,
you.
Maddie.
Bye,
Bye,
Thank
everyone.
everyone.
you.